Thought maybe the Orioles coaching staff, or at least major league staff changes, were over, but they're still ongoing as head athletic trainer Brian Ebel will not return to the Orioles next season. We'll talk about that, plus some World Series updates coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, October 28th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we are going to talk about a little bit of Orioles news from last week. Brian Ebel, their head athletic trainer, who's been with the organization for 40 years, will not return to the Orioles next season. We'll talk about a couple of former O's in the World Series. Evan Phillips, who actually was not put on the roster for the Dodgers, but kind of what he's turned into since leaving Baltimore, and Jack Flaherty, who had a great start in World Series Game 1. And then we'll briefly talk about the goings-on of some memorable World Series games 1 and 2 between the Yankees and the Dodgers over the weekend. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers will get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So we'll begin this one with some Orioles news, and that is that there is going to be another staff change at the major league level for the Orioles. We've talked about some of them already. Freddie Gonzalez is out as Orioles bench coach. Jose Hernandez not returning as one of the O's major league coaches. And then both of the Orioles co-hitting coaches are gone. Matt Borg-Schulte took the hitting coach job with the Minnesota Twins, and Ryan Fuller decided to leave the organization. More than likely, he's going to get a big league hitting coach job elsewhere as well. So the O's have a lot of holes to fill, and now they have another one, as it was reported by The Athletic and the Baltimore Banner last week, that head athletic trainer Brian Ebel will not return to the Orioles in 2025. Ebel, who had been the Orioles' major league head athletic trainer for the past 7 seasons, but that wasn't his only time in the organizations. He's been with the Orioles for 40 years. 28 of those 40 years, he was working with the major league club. He kind of started as an athletic trainer at the minor league level. Then he was on the staff under Richie Bancells. And then when Bancells retired, I believe after the 2017 season, they promoted Ebel to head athletic trainer, and he has been in that role since then. And really, he's been an amazing part of this Orioles organization. Again, for 40 years. Think of how many players, especially being with the big league club for 28 years. Like, he goes back into the 90s when he was working with the club. This is a guy who was working with Cal Ripken Jr. with the Orioles and is now done after 40 years. Now, we haven't gotten further reporting on whether or not it was Ebel's decision, it was the Orioles' decision, it was a mutual decision. We do not know that at this point, and that's something, especially with an athletic trainer, we may not know, and especially for a guy with 40 years, the chance it could have been some sort of retirement put in there as well. But what we do know is he's done a great job since he's taken over this gig. He and his staff won the 2023 MLB Athletic Training Staff of the Year award last year. That kind of allowed him to end up being the athletic trainer for the American League in the 2024 MLB All-Star Game. That was a pretty cool honor for Ebel as well. But you do look at health when a move like this is made. And the first thing I do want to say is teams generally, 95+% of the time, are not making changes in their athletic training staff based on one season of bad health. That is usually not what's happening. And this Orioles team, very healthy in 2022, which allowed them to, add 30 wins and be in the playoff race. Very, very healthy in 2023, one of the biggest reasons they won over 100 games and won the American League East that season. And then this year was the first time in a while they just got hit by the injury bug, and it comes for every single team, especially with pitching in Major League Baseball across the league. You see elbow injury after elbow injury. And although Felix Bautista had his run in last August, it really came for the Orioles here in 2024. Of course, they were without Bautista, but then you have John Means go down again and get another Tommy John surgery. You have Kyle Bradish get injured, come back from it and pitch, then get re-injured, get the elbow surgery. You have Tyler Wells get the elbow surgery. And those things, you're not throwing on any training staff. Because if you look around the league, Tommy John surgeries continue to go up. They are rampant in the game. It is a huge issue for just the sport of baseball in general that there are so many elbow injuries and so many elbow surgeries. And you can't throw that by any means on any single head athletic trainer or any single athletic training staff. But what you can say is it wasn't just the elbow injuries for the Orioles this year either. You had Ryan Mountcastle and Ramon Arias and Jordan Westberg, but them too, like, Westberg and Arias, they came back in good time. They had on-field injuries that are really hard to stop. Westberg gets hit by a pitch. Heston Kjerstad missed time, got hit by a pitch. Ramon Arias rolled his ankle on the third base bag. Like, really the only injuries for the Orioles this year that you could say at all, like, wow, that took more time to heal than I thought, was probably the injuries of Grayson Rodriguez and Ryan Mountcastle. Those would really be the only ones. Mountcastle, who kind of jammed his wrist in that play in August, and it seemed like it'd be like a week or two max, and it took him more than a month to return to the Orioles lineup right at the end of the season. And then Rodriguez, who had the one little shoulder issue earlier in the year, but came back quickly and pitched very well for the Orioles, went back on the injured list with another one of those lat issues that he had suffered a couple of years ago. And, Rodriguez said everything like, hey, this is less severe than it was in 2022, that the injury that basically ended the entire second half of his minor league and what could have been potentially a major league debut that year. And all the messaging around it was, hey, he's going to miss some time, but this is less severe. We think we can get him back near the end of the season, at worst in the postseason. And the Orioles decided to, in late September, just shut Rodriguez down because he just kind of ran out of time in terms of his rehab to get back to a full go to help the Orioles on the mound in the postseason. Really, it was Grayson and a little bit of Mountcastle were the only one where you were like, man, why did it take this long to come back? But even that, injuries like that happen to a player or two for like every team, every season. So again, I don't think, looking at the injury struggles the Orioles had in 2024, that being something that would cause them to move on from their head athletic trainer, who again has been with the organization for 40 years and been with the big league club for 28 of those years. I'm sure there's a lot of factors that went into this decision. Again, we haven't gotten the further reporting there. And maybe the Orioles just want to go in a different direction. Now, there are other people on this staff, and it looks like from the reporting, we got some from Rock over at Masson, that the rest of this staff, at least for now, is going to stay, which could mean one of the people on Ebel's staff could be promoted to head athletic trainer. Same thing when Richie Bancels retired. Ebel got promoted to this job. Could be a similar thing because you have some very long-tenured people that work with the big league training staff. Mark Shires, who's one of the assistant athletic trainers, he's been with the organization since 1999. Pat Wesley, he's been with the Orioles since 2003. And Chris Poole has been with the Orioles since 2013. So you've got multiple decades of experience on the rest of this athletic training staff for the Orioles. There's a good chance that one of them just does get promoted to head athletic trainer. Again, it's maybe not the impact that, whoever the Orioles' new hitting coach and new bench coaches are when they make those hires, but it's still important. You want to have full trust in your head athletic trainer. So good luck to Brian Ebel and whatever is next. Just an amazing career to have 40 years with one organization, obviously very highly respected in this organization. And we will see what comes next for the Orioles training staff. But one guy that the Orioles and Brian Ebel did work on as a training staff a couple of years ago is Evan Phillips, who had a couple of injury issues when he was with the Orioles. And then the O's basically decided to cut him loose back in 2021. And shortly after that, he became the Dodgers closer. And while he did not make the World Series roster because he had, again, a bit of an injury issue that keeps him out for the World Series this year with the Dodgers, he was a big part of getting them to this World Series. And I want to talk about Phillips a little bit because he's kind of one of those guys who got away from the Orioles. And I'll try to tell you why coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks. What's Prize Picks? Well, Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. They've got over 10 million members, 10 million users over at Prize Picks. That is a whole lot of people who are playing these games, who are using this app, and they are winning some money. So how do you play? Well, all you do is just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Prize Picks really makes daily fantasy sports accessible to all, and you can run your game all season long at Prize Picks. Football, baseball, basketball, hockey, they've got it all over at Prize Picks. Just picking more or less on as little as 4 correct picks, you could win up to 100 times your money. Just look at a stat line they give you. You say that player's going to get more or that player is going to get less. It's that simple. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. And that is at Prize Picks. Run your game. So with the Dodgers and the Yankees in the World Series, Dodgers with a 2-0 lead now, which we will get to in the final segment of this show. But, I talked briefly about that there are 3 former Orioles who are with these 3 teams right now, and 2 of them ended up making the World Series roster. Nestor Cortes Jr., Evan Phillips, and Jack Flaherty. All 3 pitchers, Nestor with the Yankees, Flaherty and Phillips with the Dodgers. Phillips, though, was kind of a surprise omission from the Dodgers World Series roster, and it came out that he was having a little bit of elbow soreness, a little bit of arm soreness late in the NLCS against the Mets. And because of that, the Dodgers weren't fully sure how available he'd be, so they did leave him off of the World Series roster. However, he has still been a big part of this Dodger bullpen over the past few seasons. And, Nestor Cortes, he was an Orioles Rule 5 pick in 2018. They returned him to the Yankees after 4 appearances. He bounced around a bunch after that before finally kind of figuring it out as a starter with the Yankees. And we know how big Nestor Cortes played in game 1 of this World Series, which we will get to. And then for Jack Flaherty, we know it just didn't go well. When the Orioles acquired him from the Cardinals at the deadline last year, it just didn't work out. But he pulled it back together, pitched well for the Tigers, got traded to the Dodgers at the deadline, and pitched game 1 of the World Series. And listen, the Orioles went for it, didn't work out, can't fault him for that. But of these 3 players who are contributors to World Series teams, the one who I feel like as an Orioles fan and as an organization, you should be kind of kicking yourself about is Evan Phillips. Phillips initially actually was born in the Salisbury area, grew up an Orioles fan, was in the Braves organization, and came over to the Orioles at the 2018 deadline during the fire sale. He was part of the Kevin Gausman trade when Gausman and O'Day went to Atlanta. Phillips came over along with Bruce Zimmerman and others in that deal from the Braves. And Phillips was one of those guys who at least did get a shot at the big league level. Now, we know the Orioles didn't get much, if anything, from that deadline and that haul. At this point, Dean Kramer is really the only guy they got back at that deadline who's contributing to the big league team now that Dylan Tate was DFA'd this season. But Phillips came over and, they put him in the bullpen shortly after the trade in 2018. And from 2018 to 2020, he pitched parts of 3 seasons, and it didn't really go well on the stat sheet. 47 2/3 innings for Phillips out of the Orioles bullpen in those 3 years. He had a 7.36 ERA. 65 strikeouts was a really good K rate. 36 walks was a really, really high walk rate. And after the 2020 season, when Phillips was kind of pitching as a middle reliever during the shortened season that year for the Orioles, and again, it still was not really what the O's wanted. It was a 5.02 ERA in about 14 innings, despite some really high strikeout rates. Also had some really high walk rates. The Orioles decided it was time to move on, and they DFA'd Phillips to create room on the 40-man roster that offseason. But nobody else is really intrigued by Phillips either. He actually cleared waivers that offseason, and the Orioles got to keep him in AAA Norfolk without him counting against the 40-man roster. So Phillips did get an invite to big league spring training in 2021, and I actually thought he had a chance to make that team and probably should have made that opening day roster, but did not. So the Orioles sent him down to AAA Norfolk in 2021, and he stayed in the organization, and he did have some elbow issues, and again, just didn't really pitch super well in AAA either. And so you kind of understand why the Orioles did it. He had an over 5 ERA and 25 innings in AAA in 21 and had some more elbow issues as well, which he was dealing with the year before. And the Orioles decided to just release him. Like they could have held on to him in AAA, and they just straight up released him, which is even kind of a weirder decision, but that's what they did in August. The Rays picked him up. He pitched a few games the big league level for the Tampa Bay Rays, and then they put him on waivers, and that is when the Dodgers came calling in 2021. And he was picked up by the Dodgers. He was put on the big league roster. He pitched 10 1/3 innings to a 3.48 ERA, and he actually made the Dodgers postseason roster and actually pitched a little bit out of the bullpen in the 2021 NLCS for the Dodgers. But you were still like, this could be some smoke and mirrors. We'll see if he actually can make this team next season. And then he did in 2022, and he was awesome for the Dodgers as a setup man that season. He pitched 63 innings and posted a 1.14 ERA for the Dodgers at the big league level in 2022. He was one of the best setup men in baseball. His strikeouts stayed high. He cut his walk rate like crazy. His sweeper continued to be good. He got better command of his other pitches. And he just turned into a dominant reliever just like that. And if you combine all of his time with the Dodgers since 2021, it's about 189 innings and a 2.28 regular season ERA with LA. After, again, he had a 7+ ERA with the Orioles. That includes the last 2 seasons in which he's been the Dodgers closer for a good chunk of that. He had 24 saves in 2023. He kind of lost his closer job this year in the second half when he started to struggle a bit, but he had 18 saves this year for the Dodgers as well. And you just look around like, what happened here where this guy was released by the 52-win 2021 Orioles, and then the next year became one of the best setup men for one of the best teams in baseball with the Dodgers? Well, there was always that sweeper for Evan Phillips that I loved. And I actually did go back and listen to a couple of episodes from like 2020 and 2021 on this podcast, the early days of this podcast, where I was talking about Evan Phillips. And I always remember being in on Phillips, but I was pretty in on him being some sort of contributor to this team. And if you even look, 2019, opponents hit 166 on the sweeper. 2020, opponents hit 188. He had the second most horizontal movement on his slider of any pitcher in baseball in 2020. Only also former Orioles legend Chaz Rowe, who literally throws a Frisbee up there, had more horizontal break, that's right to left break, on his slider that year. And now he's got one of the best sweepers in all of baseball. Like, nobody can touch it. He throws in the mid to upper 90s with his fastball. And yeah, he still gets hit a little bit by lefties, and that's the trouble he ran into this year when he lost the closer role with the Dodgers. But he's still an effective reliever, and still this season, 54 innings and a 3.62 ERA. And in this postseason, leading up to the World Series, he had not given up a run in 6 2/3 innings out of the Dodger bullpen. And they're probably upset that he was too injured to be added to the World Series roster as well, because he was pitching so well in kind of a middle relief role in the postseason. And I look at all of this, and you could identify, that's the thing. The Orioles were just, from 2019 through 2022, they were just pulling together arms from anywhere, just gathering arms off minor league deals and off waivers and whatever it may be, to just assemble this group of relievers who had some sort of trait they liked. And let's see, okay, can we get one more thing out of this guy to make him a productive big league reliever? And they did it with plenty of players, right? They found Yennier Cano as an add into that Jorge Lopez trade, and they got something changed with his release so that he could throw more strikes, and he was dominant. They found Cionel Perez. They got him to throw more strikes, and they let his dominant stuff play. They found Danny Coulomb. He got healthy and became one of the best relievers in Major League Baseball. They found Jacob Webb, and he was awesome down the stretch for the Orioles the past couple of seasons. Like, you can go on with the guys that this Orioles team has picked up to help this bullpen. And you just look at Evan Phillips with how good that sweeper was and how high that strikeout rate was at the big league level. And you look at the state of the 2021 Orioles, again, when they won 52 baseball games, and you just think, how did they let this guy go? And again, there are a lot of guys at the Orioles that have come through the system and gone where this stuff doesn't really bother me. Like, you think about someone like Reed Garrett, right, who was like a high leverage guy for the Mets this year. He was on the Orioles for a little bit last year. They let him loose. He just wasn't pitching well. And then he started to pitch well. Like, the Orioles know some guys have these traits, but sometimes it takes a couple of different stops. Sometimes it takes just a new face, whatever it may be, to really figure things out. But for Evan Phillips, like, you had him at the perfect time to figure it out. Why are you not giving big league innings in 2021 to Evan Phillips to just let him know that his sweeper's great, let him work through the other stuff and find a way? Because I knew, and I have to think the Orioles knew, there was a chance he could be unlocked and, I don't know, maybe be this good, but be a pretty good reliever. He's not stealing anyone's roster spot if you keep him on the 2021 Orioles. Again, he pitched for the O's 2018 to 20, and then in 2021, he was in AAA all year until he was released in August. Here are guys who threw 2021 relief innings for the Baltimore Orioles instead of Evan Phillips: Travis Lakins, Connor Green, Connor Wade, Fernando Abad, Sean Anderson, Dustin Knight, Max Soroller, Isaac Matson, Manny Beretta, Jay Fla, Brandon Waddell. But no room in that list of nobodies, and some serious remembering some guys, but no rooms to get some more time for Evan Phillips to still see what you have there. Like, yeah, there's been misses by Mike Elias and his front office staff. Absolutely there has been. But some of those misses have been, it just wasn't there when this guy was an Oriole, and then afterwards he started to show it. Phillips was showing it. I get that the ERA was high and the walk rate was high, but the sweeper was unbelievable when he was in Baltimore. The stuff was good. The strikeout rate was super high. It was there. In the 2021 Orioles, you just throw a guy out there like that and let him learn how to do it. And that's something Dylan Tate was able to do that year and then turn into more of a high leverage reliever. That was something that Jorge Lopez was able to do that year and then turn into a high leverage reliever. Like, you could have just thrown Evan Phillips right in there and he could have been on that same track. So I really do think this is one of the bigger swings and misses by the Orioles. And shout out to Evan Phillips for locking down this role. It's unfortunate for him that he was injured and isn't on the World Series roster, but hoping he can get a ring here with the Dodgers, because remember, they won in 2020 and he didn't join the Dodgers until 2021. But just one of the guys that I think I was on pretty early, and the O's just kind of missed on that one with Evan Phillips. But as I mentioned, he's not on the World Series roster, but one former Oriole that is, or at least two former Orioles that are Jack Flaherty and Nestor Cortez. And wow, did the two of them play huge roles in Game 1 of the World Series on Friday. Coming up next, we'll do a quick little recap of Games 1 and 2 of a fantastic World Series so far. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets just if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So just to finish things off here on a Monday episode, just want to do a quick little Game 1 and 2 World Series recap here on the pod course. Game 1 was a game absolutely for the ages. Dodgers 6, Yankees 3, the Freddie Freeman walk-off grand slam in the bottom of the 10th. First time in World Series history. The game had ended with a walk-off grand slam to give the Dodgers a 1-0 lead. And first, we do have to talk about Jack Flaherty, because we know how much of a disaster that was for Flaherty after the trade last season. Traded to the Orioles with a deadline to get some pitching help. He was coming off injury. He wasn't pitching his best in St. Louis, but you felt like something was there. And then he threw 34 2/3 innings to a 6.75 ERA down the stretch for the Orioles. Barely made the playoff roster as just the mop-up long relief man, basically, in the ALDS last season. When the O's traded for him, they wanted him to be their number 3 starter in the playoffs, and that just did not happen at all. So Flaherty signs with the Tigers this offseason on a 1-year prove-it deal, and he proves it. 18 starts with the Tigers, 2.95 ERA. They trade him to the Dodgers, where he wasn't as good, but 10 starts with LA down the stretch, 3.58 ERA. He helps them into the playoffs, and he hadn't been super great in his first 3 postseason starts this year with LA, but he takes the ball in Game 1 of the World Series against the New York Yankees and gives the Dodgers a chance to win. 5 1/3, 2 runs, 5 hits, 6 Ks, a walk and a homer on 90 pitches for Flaherty, who really made one big mistake, a mistake that a lot of pitchers have been making this postseason, which was hang a breaking ball to Giancarlo Stanton, who then hit a 2-run shot off Flaherty in the 6th, the final batter he faced to give the Yankees a 2-1 lead. But he looked great. And it's been what Flaherty's been all year, like 19 swings and misses, 12 whiffs on 17 swings against his curveball against the Yankees in Game 1 on Friday. It was just a different pitcher than we saw in Baltimore last year. Simple as that. Like, the breaking stuff is so much crisper. He can hold the velocity. He can command the fastball better. It's just a completely different pitcher that Jack Flaherty has been. And it's unfortunate, right? It's unfortunate that for a multitude of reasons, it did not work out in that half season in Baltimore. You know, you're happy for him that he figured it out again. He will be a free agent again this offseason. Maybe, just maybe, the Orioles would dip their toe back into that to see if Flaherty would be open, or the O's would be open to a reunion there if he's going to pitch like this. But he held that Yankees order down, and maybe he shouldn't have been out there again to face Soto and Judge and Stanton a third time in the 6th inning, like the third time through the order penalty. It rarely loses, and it certainly got Jack Flaherty on Friday night. But the Dodgers did enough to win that game, even with the full breakdown in the top of the 10th to give up that run, Jazz Chisholm just stealing bases and the Dodgers not playing good defense really all night. Aaron Boone made quite a decision. And this was also a good reminder. Like, Dave Roberts was not making great decisions in this game. Maybe left Jack Flaherty in too late. Had Kike Hernandez bunt in that big spot in the 7th where the Dodgers ended up not scoring a run when they had first and second and nobody out. But that bottom of the 10th inning on Friday, wow. I mean, you get first and second, one out. Jake Cousins is in there for the save because the Yankees had already used Clay Holmes and Tommy Kahnle and Luke Weaver. Luke Weaver had gotten 5 outs. So you're going to Jake Cousins. He doesn't have it. You got first and second, one out. You got the lefty, righty, lefty top of the lineup with Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman coming up for the Dodgers. And you've got 2 lefties warming up in that Yankee bullpen. One is Tim Hill, who came over on waivers this year, has been really the best Yankee lefty reliever down the stretch. And the other one is Nestor Cortes, who had not pitched since September 18th. He had been a starter most of the year for the Yankees. He was dealing with injury. Nobody was sure if he'd even be available for the playoffs. They activated him to the World Series roster for the first time. He was going to pitch in relief. And Tim Hill was ready to go. And he's a guy who's gotten you big outs, and you might need a double play. He's a huge ground ball pitcher. And Aaron Boone calls on Nestor Cortes to save a game in the 10th in Game 1 of the World Series, pitching for the first time in like 5 weeks. Could not believe that was the call. And it almost worked. He gets Shohei Ohtani to fly out on the first pitch. He walks Mookie Betts to load the bases with 2 outs, get the better matchup against the lefty Freddie Freeman. And then he throws a 90-mile-per-hour fastball right down the middle, and Freeman cranks it for a walk-off grand slam to give the Dodgers the win, a la Kirk Gibson. Great call by Joe Davis on that one as well. And you just I would get going to Nestor maybe there if Tim Hill wasn't available, but you had your best lefty reliever warmed up and ready to go in that spot. And to go to Nestor Cortes feels like extreme overmanaging. And the reason I bring it up is just, it's a good reminder of what goes on with other managers around Major League Baseball. I know a lot of people are unhappy at times with Brandon Hyde, but you look at that situation, that's like Brandon Hyde being in that spot with the lefties up and having Danny Coulombe ready and just, I don't even know what the best comp is here. Maybe going to Cade Povich, even though you had Danny Coulombe ready out of the bullpen. Like, that's what that decision would be like in the World Series. Maybe it's unfair for Cade Povich because Nestor Cortes is much more established lefty, but still, that's kind of what that would look like right there. And everybody would have Brandon Hyde's head right now. They kind of have Aaron Boone's head after that decision. It's just that you look around the league and there's some puzzling things that happen from some managers. And listen, I'll take it. Certainly cheering for the Dodgers to win this one. And what an amazing moment that was at the end of Game 1. And then Game 2 on Saturday, a 4-2 Dodgers win as they go up 2-0 in the series. Much more straightforward. Like, Carlos Rodon gets hit around. He gives up some homers to Teoscar Hernandez. And who else hit some homers in this game? Tommy Edman hit another home run because, of course, he did. And he got by Freddie Freeman as well. And it's a 4-1 lead early. And then it's just like, Yoshinobu Yamamoto was awesome. Anthony Bonda, Michael Kopech. And then the Dodgers just run into a little bit of trouble. It's 4-1 top 9. Blake Trinan gets into a jam, gives up a run, loads the bases with 1 out, then gets Anthony Volpe to swing at a sweeper that was in the other batter's box. And then, the Dodgers play the matchups and they go to Alex Vesia, a lefty who had been out for a little while. And it was huge to get another lefty back in their bullpen and get him reacclimated. And Aaron Boone again takes out Austin Wells. And I get it, he struggles against lefties, but he goes to Jose Trevino, who's basically been your backup catcher for most of the second half of the season because Austin Wells has won that job. And you got to feel like it's the Yankees. They got to have a better right-hander on the bench that's better than Jose Trevino, a backup catcher. They go to him. He flies out on the first pitch, and the Dodgers win Game 2. I mean, it was quite an ending. That seemed like the most, nothing game, World Series game of all time. It was like 4-1 early and then just stayed 4-1. And then we got a really cool moment in the 9th. And it was nerve-wracking to see Blake Trinan throw 33 pitches and then Alex Vesia come in and throw 1 and lock that game down. Yeah, I'm pretty clearly cheering for the Dodgers, and I'm sure many of you out there are as well. The Dodgers take a 2-0 lead. Game 3 is tonight. Yeah, I'm always in for a fun and long World Series that goes 6 or 7 games. When the Yankees are involved, it's really just about having the Yankees lose, if we're being honest. So wouldn't mind to sweep it all. It's potentially former or future Oriole Walker Buehler going up against Clark Schmidt in Game 3 tonight. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are back tomorrow with a little more Orioles-centric talk. We continue our 2024 Orioles player season review series. We're going to talk about Ryan O'Hearn's season on tomorrow's episode. He was a very different hitter. He cut his strikeouts. He upped his walks. Didn't hit the ball as hard. But he ended up producing offensively basically at the same rate as he did in his 2023 season. And the Orioles have a club option on him to bring him back next year. Will they pick it up? And what kind of hitter should he be in 2025? We'll answer those questions coming up on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.